My name is Priya Nair. I am 26 years old. I work in franchise development, and I found out my parents had spent 3 years telling the whole family my sister built their restaurant from nothing. At a dinner where they handed her a framed article about the restaurant and she cried and everyone clapped, including me. The article said, "Local eatery becomes neighborhood staple. Owner credits hard work, vision, and starting from the ground up." My sister Deepa didn't build from the ground up. She didn't build from scratch. She built inside a system I built for her, a franchise agreement I researched, negotiated, and signed my name to, because my parents couldn't qualify for the license and Deepa didn't understand what a franchise was. And I was 23 and working in the field and the opportunity was real and I wanted my family to have it. I held the license. My name was in the agreement. I was the legal franchisee. What my family had of the brand, the recipes, the operational system, the training support, the regional territory rights, they had because I'd signed for it. My sister ran the restaurant. She was good at it. She worked hard, and I'm not taking that away. But she did not build from scratch. And for 3 years, my parents had been telling people she had, at family dinners, to neighbors, in interviews, on a framed article they were apparently handing out as a gift. I clapped. I took a piece of cake. And I waited. Because my parents had made one enormous mistake, and they'd made it by forgetting that franchise agreements come up for renewal, and that renewal notices go to the licensee. Before I tell you what the franchisor's renewal packet said, and what happened when my family finally understood what a licensee actually is, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether someone has ever claimed ownership of a door you quietly held open. I want to see how far this story travels. I work in franchise development. I help businesses structure, launch, and expand franchise systems, the legal and operational backbone that lets a brand grow through independent operators. I know what it costs to get a license, what it means to hold one, and exactly how much of a built-from-scratch story depends on the scaffolding nobody photographs. My family found this abstract. Deepa ran a restaurant, which was visible and warm and smelled good. I read franchise disclosure documents and evaluated territory rights, which was none of those things. My mother introduced Deepa at family events as my daughter. She runs a restaurant. She introduced me as Priya helps businesses, with the paperwork side. The paperwork side. I've been introduced as the paperwork side of things my entire professional life, and I've never once corrected it, because correcting it means explaining what the paperwork actually does, and explaining what the paperwork actually does takes longer than anyone wants to listen. I want to be fair. Deepa worked for that restaurant every day, and the work was real. The 6-day weeks, the difficult customers, the staff management, the supply chain, the daily reality of keeping a small food business alive, she did all of that, and it's not nothing. What she did not do is build the system she was working inside. She didn't negotiate the brand rights. She didn't put her name on the liability. She didn't understand, and still doesn't fully understand, the difference between operating a franchise and owning the license to operate one. The difference is my name. On a document. In a franchisor's file. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until the framed article. At year 1, when the restaurant turned its first profit and my parents threw a small party, my mother gave a toast about Deepa's courage in starting a business from nothing. I was there. I had signed the license agreement 9 months earlier. I held my glass and I drank. At year 2, when a local paper ran a short profile, Deepa said in the quote, "I just decided to go for it. Nobody handed me anything." I read that sentence 4 times. Nobody handed me anything. The license. The brand. The training system. The regional exclusivity. The operational manual. All of it, handed. None of it, handed by no one. And at the dinner with the framed article, when Deepa held it up and cried, real tears, genuine gratitude, my father said, "You built this," and she said, "I really did," and everyone in the room believed it, because it looked true, and it was true in every visible way, and the only untrue part was the word built applied to from scratch when what she'd actually done was operated from a foundation I'd laid. Each moment asked me to stay quiet. I stayed quiet. I was waiting for the document that would say it for me. Franchise agreements run on terms. 3 years, 5 years, depending on the brand. Mine was a 3-year initial term with renewal options. The renewal notice arrived when the agreement was 14 months from expiration. Sent by the franchisor's compliance office, by certified mail, to the licensee of record. To me. Because I was the licensee. My name, my signature, my legal and financial responsibility. The franchise had been operating under my name for 2 years, generating revenue my family called Deepa's, and the franchisor's records had never once reflected anyone other than me as the responsible party. The renewal packet required me to confirm continued compliance, update my financials, and sign for the next term. I sat at my kitchen table with the packet for a long time. I could have handed it to Deepa. I could have said, "Here, this is yours now, sign it, I'll step back." I'd thought about doing that, actually, in the early days, transitioning the license once the restaurant was stable, once my parents understood what they were operating inside. I hadn't, for one reason that I kept circling back to, nobody had ever asked me. Not my parents, not Deepa, not anyone. Nobody had said, "Priya, you hold the license, what's your plan for the long term?" Nobody had considered that the paperwork side of things might have a preference. And then they'd handed my sister a framed article about building something from nothing, and I'd clapped, and nobody in that room had thought to wonder why the paperwork person looked a little still. So I held the renewal packet. And I thought very carefully about what I actually wanted. Here is where the story becomes a choice. I could have declined to renew. Just not signed. A franchise that expires without renewal loses the right to operate under the brand, the recipes, the name, the system, everything that made the restaurant what it was. I could have watched the thing unwind from a legal distance and let my family find out, when they called the franchisor to understand what had happened, that the person who hadn't renewed was the person they'd been calling the paperwork side. I thought about that version for about a week. It was a vivid week. But what I actually wanted was not the restaurant's collapse. I wanted my name attached to what I'd built, on paper, in a way that couldn't be edited out of future interviews. And declining to renew would have collapsed the business, hurt my parents, put Deepa's staff out of work, and made me the villain, the sister who took the restaurant away because she wasn't getting enough credit, which is a role I was not going to play. The restaurant was a real thing. The people it employed were real people. My parents' pride in it was real, even if the story they'd wrapped around it wasn't. So I made a different move. I called the franchisor's relationship manager, someone I knew professionally, because that's what happens when you work in the field, and I explained the situation. Not as a grievance. As an operational question, the restaurant was being run by my family, effectively as a family business, and I was the licensee of record. What were my options for structuring the renewal in a way that accurately reflected the operational reality? She was helpful and unsurprised, because this situation, licensee and operator being different people, is more common than families realize. The answer was a formal management agreement. My name stays on the license. Deepa's name goes on the management agreement as the operator of record. The franchisor's public-facing documents list both. Operational credit to Deepa. Legal accountability to me. Both accurate. Both on paper. I prepared the documents and I sent them to my parents. My mother called me 20 minutes after opening the email. She said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's the franchise renewal. The license is in my name, it's been in my name since the beginning. To renew, we need to structure this correctly. That means acknowledging that I'm the licensee and Deepa is the operator." She said, but Deepa runs the restaurant. And I said, yes. And I've held the license for 3 years. Both of those things are true. They've always both been true. What's changing is that the paperwork is going to reflect both. She was quiet, and then she said, we didn't know the license was yours. And I said the sentence I'd say again exactly the same way. I said, you did know, Mom. I told you when I signed it. You said thank you, and Dad said the same thing. And then for 3 years you told everyone Deepa built it from nothing, and you framed an article about it and gave it to her as a gift. I didn't say anything, because the restaurant was real and it was working, and I didn't need the credit to know the work was mine. But the license comes up for renewal, and I'm not going to put my name on another 3 years of legal responsibility for a business where my name doesn't exist in the story. Deepa called me that evening. Her voice was different from the dinner voice, no performance, no tears, just a quietness that meant she'd been sitting with something. She said, I didn't know. And I said, I know you didn't. She said, I thought Mom and Dad had sorted the paperwork. And I said, I sorted the paperwork. That's the part Mom and Dad couldn't do, and the part you didn't understand, and the part one did because I work in this field and I could see it was a good opportunity. And then I handed it to you and stepped back, and that's fine, that's what family does. What I didn't expect is that stepping back would mean stepping out of the story entirely. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the article said I built it from scratch. And I said, I saw the article. She said, I should have corrected that. I didn't answer that, because there's no answer that isn't cruel. She should have. She hadn't. The article was framed and on my parents' wall. The renewal was signed. Both names on the paperwork, mine as licensee, hers as operator. The franchisor updated their records. The next time a reporter asks about the restaurant's founding, the management agreement exists and is findable and says exactly what it says. I didn't ask for the article to be updated. I didn't ask for a new interview. I didn't ask my parents to call the family and correct the story. I just made sure the next document told the truth, because documents outlast dinners. Deepa and I have been closer since, in the careful way of two people who've renegotiated something that was never formally negotiated the first time. She calls me when the franchisor sends anything. She asked me last month to look at a potential second location. I looked. The numbers are good. My mother has stopped saying from scratch. Not out of guilt, she just can't make herself say it the same way anymore, because the thing she knows is in the way. That's enough. I don't need the framed article taken down. I need the next frame to be honest. I keep page 1 of the original franchise agreement on my desk. Not the renewal, that's filed. The original, from 3 years ago, when I was 23 and chose to put my name on something my family needed and couldn't do themselves. My name in the licensee field. The date. The territory. The term. Because that page is the thing that was actually true. My family could frame an article about building from nothing. They could hand it to my sister and cry. They could introduce me as the paperwork side. They could not, in the end, argue with a certified renewal notice addressed to the licensee of record. They said she built it from the ground up. It turned out the ground was a document with my name on it. So if there's someone in your life who's standing on a foundation you laid and calling themselves self-made, who's run with something you licensed, or funded, or built the structure for, and called it theirs from scratch, ask yourself one thing tonight. When does the agreement come up for renewal? Because nothing runs forever on someone else's name. Eventually the document surfaces. Eventually the compliance office sends the letter. And when it does, the question is only this: what do you want your name attached to, and on whose terms? Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: The person who holds the license is not always the person who runs the business, and the person who runs the business is not always the person who made it possible. Both matter. Both deserve to be on the paperwork. If your name isn't on the paperwork, put it there, not out of spite, but because the paperwork is the only version of the story that survives the next dinner.